Welcome back, and we're going to get into this other part, and a little darker part on the mind and controlling the mind. Thinking about this area, this one is always the one that gets everyone like excited, because when you start talking about the mind, we're really talking about free choice, right? I mean, after all, if you can interfere with the way someone feels or thinks, aren't you really interfering with choice? Something that most traditions of the world say God won't even do. But there's people that will. Let's think about a little bit of this. I'm going to grab a couple of books to help illustrate the point and make the point a little bit better. I'm going to grab these four. And this is really, and we'll talk about these, we'll walk through each one of these in the course of this discussion, because these are fundamental to the whole concept of controlling your mind. And I'm going to start with the earliest one, this one. And this is it's called the unreality industry, the deliberate manufacturing of falsehood and what it is doing to our lives. And these are two academics. And the book was written, let's get the date so it's relevant, you know, and everybody gets it. Is this something that got written yesterday? No, it got written in 1989, okay? Long before all of the stuff we see going on right now. Now, the guy who sent me this was one of my dear friends. He was a scholar, a real scholar. He read for his entire life. He died in his late 60s. He went to work for me when I was 16 and he was in his 30s. And he was one of the people that worked for me in my jewelry store. He was a silversmith. But John and I shared a love for wisdom and knowledge, and so we shared books our entire lives. We read hundreds and hundreds of the same books. The last one he sent me was this one with a little note. And John, he lived in the back of a pickup truck his whole life. You know, one of those little cab overs you drive around. He lived up here for a number of years. A couple of years he lived in a tent here in Anchorage in the winter. Tent's not a good place to live in the winter, but he had a backyard of a friend of ours. He wasn't like a homeless guy squatting on public land. He lived in a tent in the backyard of a buddy of ours. And it was one of those big canvas military tents. And John used to laugh about it. He loved that tent. It was $100 mortgage is what he used to say. Who gets a mortgage for $100, right? And he had a wood stove stuck in it and a little wood stove chute out the top, and he spent 2 winters there. And he'd shower every once in a while at our buddy's place. And he was perfectly happy, John. And then he got a cab over and he lived in that for quite a while. And then he went down to Pecos and hung out there for a while and read every day, had a really interesting life. Someday I'll tell some more stories about him. It's not for today. But here's what he did is he became a multi-millionaire 10 years or so before he died. Nobody ever knew it because he still lived in that same pickup truck. Still drove around and wonder how come he couldn't get a date. You know, I'm just joking with you, but it's true. I tried to explain it to him one day. I said, you know, John, most women like to have at least a little bit of a nest, and the back of your pickup truck doesn't quite cut it, you know, and you might want to rethink the equation, seeing that you could afford a little bit of a nest anyway. But he wouldn't have any part of it. What he did with his wealth was help people out every once in a while. Most of the time they never knew it. But his job for me, the way he saw it, he was the dean of the school of underachievement, all right? Because his job in his whole life was to slow me down. Because when he first met me, he thought I was on a race and there was a hurricane running around me, but I never saw any hurricane. I just saw the calm center of the storm. So he and I became friends over the idea that sometimes you can achieve too much and you need to slow down. And I was joking just before we came back into this segment. It's so nice to be able to talk slow and get it all out. Because some people have expressed a little frustration. Oh, he talks so fast, I can't keep up. It's that frustration that I have been feeling by not being able to get this out. And the regular radio shows and the stuff I do are so limited to get the time. So what was this about, the unreality industry? What were they about creating? It was talking about television and radio and how stars are created, how personalities are created, and then just dispense with till you need a new one. And they create the heroes, and they create the circumstances, and they paint the cultural reality. The entertainment, media, news industry, this is what they do. They create reality for you. Not the real reality, theirs. The version that makes you into a consumer and a taxpayer and a guy that plays their game, that they write the script for. And then they write the curriculum for your kids. And then they make sure the corporations run your politicians. And then they run your institutions. And then they run everything sooner or later. And they do. And you help them do it, and I help them do it by failing to see what's happening around us, even when they tell you that they create an unreality program. A whole industry of lying and fake news that they've been working on for 31 years that they've been talking about it. Now you read the older work, read 1984 Revisited, 1958, roll back a few more years. Roll back to radio when it was first invented. When it was first invented, a lot of people don't know this because why would you? No one's alive and no one passes anything on multi-generationally. But at the time radio first came out, people were saying, it's making me go crazy, I can hear things. Everyone, you're out of your mind. But now they know that like 1 to 3% of the population has what's called electromagnetic sensitivities, where they are sensitive to these things. They do perceive them in a way that others don't. Well, in the soup that we're in that I described a little while ago, it's no wonder you can't sort it out. But again, part of this is you have to know how it works. So it's like tuning a radio, literally, like tuning a radio. When you go through the stations, when you get resonance, harmony, remember I was talking about resonance before, harmony between transmitter and receiver, the signal's perceived. Same is true in the human body. Most of the space in the frequency bandwidth goes right through you. It's invisible, doesn't stop along the way, has no effect. But the parts that do, what they call window frequencies, the ones that have effect, those get known as time goes on, and then you know, oh wow, like Anu Michaela, what she did with her Institute in Healing. She figured out what viruses and bacteria and molds and things that you don't want were associated with specific bandwidth of energetic frequency. A bandwidth that you could then utilize a carrier to carry that energy in, like a laser or an electric current. And her dad developed an electrolaser acupuncture method for doing that. That was extraordinarily effective. And more importantly, what she developed was methods for purifying foods by treating them with light, basically, so that the bacteria and things in there that you don't want to grow couldn't. They were dead, inactive. And so then at air temperature, just sealed so nothing else could get in, you didn't need refrigeration. You know, because you were able to manage the things that would grow into the things that putrefy meat or milk or whatever you're trying to preserve. One of the biggest problems in feeding the world is refrigeration, which is an energy-related problem actually, because you don't have energy that's reliable. And that's why so many people starve to death. We just can't refrigerate food. You know, we can't get the energy that we need a little bit to do those things. So when I think about controls, when I think about propaganda, again, it gets into the shortage models. But let's talk about, again, some of the thinkers and what they were thinking. Zbigniew Brzezinski, when he wrote this. Now this goes back a little further. When we look at the copyright on this, we're going to drop back a few more years to 1970. Okay, now that's a long time ago. Now we're 50 years back. Zbigniew Brzezinski was at Columbia University when he wrote this book. On page, I think it's 54, let's see if I'm right, it's been a while, but there's a discussion in here. Nope, it's 56. And it was J.F. Gordon MacDonald's quotes, and it was him, and he says, a geophysicist specialized in problems of warfare has written that accurately timed, artificially excited electronic strokes could lead to a pattern of oscillations that produce relatively high power levels over certain regions of the Earth. In this way, one could develop a system that would seriously impair the brain performance of very large populations in selected regions over an extended period. No matter how deeply disturbing the thought of using the environment to manipulate behavior for national advantages to some, the technology permitting such use will very probably develop within the next few decades, and it did. And this is the point. These guys saw it coming. Zbigniew Brzezinski in this book, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, was in advance of everything computer. There were no computers then. None. There was this big monstrous thing, fill up a house and could do what a hand calculator on a watch will do today. In fact, the watch will do way more. They didn't have any of that. What this guy predicted was what would happen in the world based on technology that didn't exist yet. And if you look at this, everything he said would happen, politically, socially, and economically, has. 50 years you read this today, you say, oh, the guy wrote the history. No, this was written 50 years ago. He made the history, and he was part of that history. He was part of that think tank that brought China into the game, that brought the Trilateral Commission into the game, that brought the whole foreign affairs establishment into the game of changing the world into what you see right now, and that is part of that blueprint. There are a lot of people making blueprints. You don't think the Rockefeller family has a blueprint, multi-generational? They do. You don't think the Rothschilds family does? They do. The Spencers, all of them, they all do. Everybody does if they've lived a few generations and have enough wealth to preserve knowledge. You can do that if you have a notebook. And I said it earlier, preserve your knowledge, that which you want to pass on. Preserve it. Have real libraries of real books. They don't disappear in the ether when someone decides to change history on the internet. Buy books. Hold books. Their libraries are valuable. Information is valuable. Knowledge is valuable. You should always have a good library close by of books that don't get changed and they don't disappear unless someone burns them. And people would like to do that again and burn all the books and give you new ones to tell you something new. Don't let them burn your books. Don't let them burn your heritage and your history. Because everywhere missionaries go, they burn all the books. Go back 2,000 years. Go back 10,000 years. When they come in, they burn your history to the ground. Keep your books. This is a good one. This is a great book. This is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. This is how you are the product. This is how it went from selling widgets to selling your time. That's what people buy on the internet. They're paying for your time. They want to keep you locked into whatever it is, generating ad revenue, because that's how they make money. They make money on air, on nothing. Think about puff money in the stock market. How many people make money in the stock market? Does it have any relationship to anything anymore? No, it doesn't. We'll talk about that later. But here we are again, we're talking about people that deliberately manipulate everything to gather data. What kind of data can you collect on a person? Let me tell you what it means. 3,000 bits of data, which every one of us who do anything on the internet at all do every month. 3,000 little bits of your searches and bits of data about you give enough profile to pretty much tell what you're about and predict what you'll do better than you will according to these algorithms they run. Think about that. Just your interaction with machines and all the data you give up voluntarily in the course of your life. What I talked about with Jim Roderick 20 years ago called data valence, and everybody laughed because they said, oh, nobody can sort this stuff. So what if they store it? They can sort it now, and that's what we said then. And now they can sort it all at very high speeds and with about 99% accuracy tell you everything about you that you ever thought you knew. Just like they had just kicked in your front door and rifled through your underwear drawer and everything else in your house. Because that's what it is. You see, the Constitution hasn't come up with where does your label end and begin? You know, the FDA will say your label isn't on the product, it's everything you ever said about it. Well, that's your label too. That's your digital doorway they just kicked in, and they just raped every bit of your information right out from under you. And we all watched it happen and said, oh wow, isn't this convenient? Because that's how they got it. You see, the convenience of social media. People wonder, how come, Nick, you have such trouble with this computers and pushing that button to do this feed today? And let me tell you why I have so much trouble pushing that frigging button and dealing with these machines. Is because I know what they're doing to strip us of our humanity. And I've been talking about it for 30 years. And every time I have to interact with a machine, I violate myself by having to do it. Even now with this feed, I have to do it. because I know what this system is all about. And it's destroying everything we care about. And it's the only way I can communicate now until they shut me off. Like they have a lot of other voices that they didn't like. And I can tell you something. In my family, and I've talked a lot about my family, I am very conservative. And the other living Nicholas Begiches are conservative. And the rest of my family are liberal. Or mixed, I mean, because there's so much in my family. But I mean it when we get together. It is fiery emotion. It is passion about what we care about. But never do we leave each other without leaving each other, embracing each other. Because the passion is what it's about. The values we share. We would die for each other's right to say what we just said to each other, even though we strongly disagree. That's what's missing right now. And they call things tolerance. Tolerance is nothing but denying truth. It's shutting up when you want to say something. Acceptance is a little deeper. I think that's what people mean, but that is not what they say. They say, don't say what you think, be quiet. That's what happened in Germany in the 30s, you know. That's how that happened. A lot of very smart people, you know, Germans are very smart people. I know a lot of Germans are very smart people. But they were quiet. They didn't say anything. They shut up. Okay, then what happened? They shut up long enough to be tolerant and be respectful. It's like what happens today. In fact, there's a whole movement of tolerance in the world today, and I think they're selfish, self-centered people, quite frankly, because the only thing they're relieving is their own personal guilt. Oh, I'm so good because I've tolerated this horrible situation. Or I've given to the homeless because I've given them $100. Give me a break. That relieves your guilt or your sense of something, or maybe now you feel valuable because you did something. Tolerance is really an act against yourself, a violent act, by shutting up and denying your truth. Or think about this. Why are you shutting up? Why can't you say what you think? Is it wrong? Are you wrong? Or are you right? Now, this is important because if you really believe you're right but you're shutting up, then you're lying to yourself as a starting point. That's going to turn into a train wreck as a finishing point, because what you'll start doing eventually is you'll begin to repeat that thing that you don't agree with your mouth as if it were real. That's what happened in Germany in the 30s. And then before you know it, you'll quit hearing that little voice that tells you when something isn't real. That's how that gets turned off, when you quit listening. Tolerance isn't the place. Acceptance is. Here's how you meet someone who's poor and homeless, not with the $20 bill, because that might not be what they need. Meet them where they are. And this is the difference. Not where you are, or where you hope they get. You don't get them the hotel room and the comforter at the end of their journey, because that's what you would like if you were in their position. You're not them, and you're not in their position, and you've already made judgments all about them, about their position, as if you have a superior one and you may not. They might have the superior position. In terms of misery or happiness, maybe they're ahead of you. They just don't look the same as you. So when I see someone homeless, as an example, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, I want to know what took them there. Was it alcohol? Was it drugs? Are they a sex offender that can't get housing now? Are they a woman with a child that just got beaten out of her house, literally? Where is the person, and what is it that they need to become a whole person again? Meet people where they are, not with the cookie cutter solution. That includes you and me and everyone else. Just because they're in their train wreck, don't think you're not. You're just not in the same one they are in. And we're all in a train wreck, and we're all dying on the installment plan. Sooner or later, we're all out of here. But we can do some things differently. We can respect ourselves. We can deal with people differently. This in Germany, and then I take a look at cultural shaping in the reality industry, the stuff I'm talking about here. And then this one by Brittany Kaiser. This is a great work, all right? This is a young woman in her 30s. She got caught up with Cambridge Analytica, and she became their whistleblower. They created 36 personality profiles for everybody in the country virtually. And those personality profiles dictated what kinds of ads went to those people specifically. And then they determined which ones were never going to vote for Donald Trump and which ones would likely always vote for Hillary Clinton. And then what they did is they used the data to pump Trump and tear her down. And here's a good example. There was an ad that was being run in the South for black Americans. And the ad showed a white policeman, and sometimes a black policeman, but a policeman with a dog biting a black man on the ground. You know, a very vicious scene, being attack police dog kind of scene. And in the background is the voice of Hillary Clinton saying, which she had said in a speech on inner city crime, "We have to bring them to heel." And that kept repeating on that ad. "We have to bring them to heel," Hillary's voice, with a black man being chewed up by a police dog. Now, what that did for voters, because they sent that to Hillary voters supporting her, it made a lot of black voters not vote for her at all, or even bother to vote at all. So what happened with the poll numbers? She slid, he climbed. Every time they issued bad news about Trump, if you noticed, his poll numbers went up, hers went down. Why was that? Big data, that's why. Because here's what happens when you have big data. You got the politician, they got 100 issues. They know all about you, which 3 issues, which 1 issue you agree with. Because you get all your data from Facebook and Google and whatever else you're doing, they just send it in. You get only those little side ads, all that stuff that's most likely you're going to agree with, the political ads, all that. It's meant to shove you and push you just gently in the direction you're most inclined to go. So you never hear the other 97 or 99 issues you'd never agree with. And the better this system gets, and believe me, it's getting better. If we ever get a worldwide mind, it'll be perfect. Because the only information you'll ever get is that which you agree with. And this is the danger. Where do you get your information now? Right where you agree with. Why are people so amazed every time an election happens? They go, wow, I didn't see that coming. Right. Because we used to get mixed news. We used to go to so many stations. There were only 3 up here for a long time, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then there was public broadcasting. So we'd go to those, and they'd give balanced news or attempt at it. And we had 2 newspapers in town, one that was run by Republicans and one was run by Democrats. And you had both pictures. We had a morning and an evening. I read them both. My dad read them both. I read them both till they went away. And now that what we got now is a rag. I don't even want to wrap fish with it. I'm embarrassed by it. I used to win prizes. It's garbage. But when I think about the news media is no longer providing us what we needed. Was enough information for an informed electorate to run a country. Now it's about just saying whatever you want, any way you want, just a bunch of opinion pieces. That is not equipping us to run a democracy or a republic like ours. It's screwing it up. The social control, the media control is in fact how it is all managed. You know, it goes further. We're going to talk about government later. But what the media is about is it's about harvesting you, harvesting your mind and your time, and then your life energy ultimately, and to get you to trade it for a few shekels, for a little bit of money. You know, get your life back. That's where we started. It's about getting your life back and turning off the television set, because it isn't the window to the real world. It's the BS. You know, it's bad news. You know, it's not fertilizer for the brain. It isn't. It doesn't convert that way unless you're very, very selective, and you can't be, because it will draw you in, it will suck you in. You have to be disciplined. You have to decide how much of that part of the world are you going to get and where you're going to get your information. And you might say, where do I get mine? I don't watch any of the television news. It's a cartoon. Why would you watch cartoons as adults? Although a lot of them do. I noticed that too when I'm flying international flights in the back and you walk towards the front. And you'd be surprised how many adults watch junk. I mean, lots of junk. But that's okay. That's their choice too. But when you look around the world and you wonder why we're running a train wreck, think about what you're putting into the programming of your own brain. It didn't stop at 18 or 24 or whenever you finished formal schooling. In fact, whatever you got there, you got to unlearn a lot of that in real living, as most people figure out sooner or later. But again, the media is no longer reliable, so you have to be mindful of how you're seeking information. So I'll tell you a few of mine that I do. I look at my opposition, I read Foreign Affairs. That's the Council of Foreign Relations, the think tank for the globalists in the world. I read their journal every month. It's big, it takes a long time, it's massive. I read the Nexus news feed, which is an alternative news feed of 15 subject areas. It comes out every day for free on the internet. Gives you everything from politics to weirdness, you know, if that isn't weird enough. But it's worth reading. Zero Hedge still is a good source for alternative, but it's a whole spread across the big platform. And Drudge used to be, but someone bought them out. Now they're just the opposite of what they were, because that's what's happening. They're buying these guys out, and then they're flipping along with the rest of them. So there's not a lot. I read MIT, it's journal, Technology Review. It's excellent for an overview of technologies. And then I read a myriad of other publications, and then I read books, lots and lots of books, and I engage a lot of conversation. The mind control, let me talk about some of the carrier methods. Any electromagnetic carrier can carry a signal that will affect emotional state, as an example. In the book, Controlling the Human Mind, I think there's 30 patents that we give that show the chronology of all of that. So, I mean, the data is out there. And what they've learned to do is you can modulate a signal on any carrier. So you can use radio, TV, the internet. You can even use the power grid itself, and you can modulate a carrier that if you're in close proximity and you have a relatively normal system, which is a weak one, you can couple with the human body and you can move it to a point where it'll get agitated, or you can change the emotional state fairly easily. One of the other simple methods of programming, literally, is the programming you watch. When you come home at night, a lot of people do this is a routine, come home from work, you're fatigued, you're tired, you're worn out. You sit down in front of a television set and you begin to go into this sort of relaxed state. It's an altered state, actually, because your spouse is hollering at you, hey, it's dinner time. You're not hearing a word. You're in an altered state of consciousness. You're in that theta state, almost a hypnotic state, and you're being fed the 6 o'clock fricking news or whatever garbage you decided to program in your most susceptible time of the day, and you're going to get fed this? No, man, don't do that. If you're going to relax, find music, find something that is classical, that gets wiring relaxing, body relaxing, mind relaxing, so you're thinking again, not being programmed by a machine that you're going to decide to interface with or go get lost on the internet. Stop, ground yourself to the earth again, take your shoes off if it's warm enough, and walk on the grass a little bit. Literally do it. You know that you separate yourself from ground all the time, and just the shoes you wear, look at what they're made out of. You know why runners, when they're running and they run and they build, and all of a sudden this really athletic guy has the heart attack, or they get cramps in their legs often? Why is that? Well, they build up a static charge, actually, and what that does is move calcium out of the bones into the soft tissue. How you can fix that, if you take enough magnesium, it won't happen, but it will happen. And then you get cramping in the legs. But it's an electrical response. The same thing when the heart stops from the athlete. They built up a static charge, environmental conditions, it's done, boop, you short circuit. How could you stop that? Well, there's earth shoes now. That's where the name Earth Pulse originally came from. Is the idea I had was different. It was to either use a carbon sole, which would give you conductivity, a discharge of the energy. The other would be just metal rivets in the ball of your feet where you make contact, where your sweat on the inside would touch the outside and you discharge energy. But again, it's about grounding, right? And there's a whole thing of now earthing about grounding, touching the earth. Why? It's 7.83 hertz, the vibration level of the earth, its natural pulse rate, the ideal place of the brain, the place of relaxation, the place you want to be. 60 hertz is what surrounds us, the vibration of the power grid, keeping us always a little bit agitated until the power goes out, and then our whole body sort of relaxes. Think about it. Next time the power goes out, you'll notice the refrigerator's not running, the air conditioner stops, but the real thing you notice is, whew, as your whole body contracts and you're no longer dealing with that field. Or when you leave the city and you go to the really out there, whew, you notice that. And when you live in New York all your life and you go out somewhere like that, you go, boy, I don't feel comfortable. This is really uncomfortable. And you go back to New York City, right? Most New Yorkers end up back in New York because they find a sense of discomfort outside of that swill that they got so habituated to, so stressed into, so crimped up into that without that, they don't have a sense of self. They can't identify with the feelings they're having because they finally, for the first time, hit ground and touch the earth again. It's a good idea to do it. A lot of what we're seeing too in the development of the technologies is also looking at the brain in real time, like gaming. The way they used to do gaming when kids would play. After all the gaming was over, they'd go and talk to the kids and they'd fill out surveys and stuff to figure out what worked and what didn't. Well, they don't do that anymore. What they do now is they hook them up to three-dimensional MRIs and look at what their brain is doing when they play the games. Because they want you to be addicted to the game. Now, this is the fact of the matter. That's why they're always billion-dollar hits when you do them right. And the right way is to trigger the parts of the brain that the same parts triggered when you orgasm or you do drugs, right? You want to affect the same part of stimulate the person as much as you can with the visual effects and brain entrainment through the sound and the visual effects that cause the brain to move into specific areas for chemical reactions so you will come back and play that game again. Why does Facebook work? Because every time that somebody likes something, it's a little bit of a dopamine rush to the brain. It affirms, it becomes addictive. It's designed to be addictive. The guys who've left the company will tell you that. That's what it was set up to do, to create a dopamine reaction in the brain to keep you there so you'll spend your time there, so you'll be addicted to this thing there. And the gaming is the same way, and they'll tell you it's not. And they're liars, because you just have to go to any institution that teaches psychology to understand what frequency following response is, and you ask anybody spending $1 million to do a 60-second ad if they don't know that? Are you kidding me? They build it in, they have to know that, or they waste their money. If advertising didn't work, you think anybody's going to spend trillions ultimately to suck you in? You know how much of the pharmaceutical bill in America is advertising alone? 40% of every prescription drug is an ad that you're paying for a medication you can't even decide to buy without a prescription. We're going to talk about that later. But think about mind control as a concept and how it rolls in subtly, even in the gaming. And then here's the other place it works, your little device you carry around that tells everything. And every time you say, oh no, I'm safe, I did this or that, every time you buy an app has a thing you agree to, and it allows them to link up to everything else in your phone and suck it out that way. Every time you sign one of these, you agree to something. This is where the law needs to change. The data belongs to you, and here's where I think we can fix this. Make the data belong to us as individuals. This is a key. Number one, that commercial transactions can only retain the data to the point in which you can object to the transaction. Credit cards, it's usually about 6 months. Most things for tort or for litigation is 2 years. But after that, it goes away. It belongs to you, and it can only be retained by them, not to be sold and marketed like they broke into your house and stole your data. We need a whole new way of looking at data, and it's not to commercialize it, which means you're going to come against the Amazons and the Facebooks and all these people that are now the gatekeepers of free speech too. They're shutting down speakers all over this planet, and they're going to do more and more and more under the guise of tolerance and fairness and equity. There is no equity without freedom. There is no equity without liberty. And there is no equity without happiness. And that means individuals have to be free. Law libraries shouldn't be 3 floors of information we can't discern or interpret. Do you know when Abraham Lincoln was president, he didn't go to law school, but he could practice law at the bar because he passed the test. Because law books you could carry under your arm. And you could actually learn them as the average human being and pass the bar and be a lawyer. Now, why can't we do that now? and we think we have justice now. We'll get into that later. But we have a lot of illusion about things we think we have that we don't have. And anyone who's been to court ever knows how much that cost. And that expense doesn't translate into justice for most people that end up in court someday. But we'll talk about that later. Digital stress and mind control. Think about this. The stressors related from all of this digital world. We have psychosis now related to this. We get new things going into the PDR about this. You know, the idea of disease, and what is it really about? Choices, manipulation. You know, there was a book, a great book, I recommend it highly. It's called Man the Manipulator. It's been out of print for probably decades. I read it when I was in my 20s. But it was comparing manipulation to persuasion. What we have now is totally manipulation. Persuasion is getting all the facts out so people can make decisions based on information. That's what a good debate is. An informed debate is one side getting all their facts out, the other side getting all of their facts out, and then figuring out what's right. Nowadays, debates, oratory in the public sphere is what? 2-minute sections, 3-minute sections at most, maybe 5-minute sections. And most of them can't talk for that long without a teleprompter. They can't talk for 15 minutes. Think about this. If a politician can't talk for 2 hours about policy and what they're going to do without a teleprompter, they're not qualified, period. Now, we've been doing this for already 8 or 9 hours. I don't know where the clock is right now, and we haven't even got into policy yet. And I'm not running for anything ever, I can promise you that. But here's what I know about this. A person who wants to lead should know something and should be able to articulate it with their mouth and be able to explain it all to a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 100-year-old. And no matter what generation you rolled out, if somebody knows what they're talking about, ought to be able to explain it. Or I would suggest they don't know it. They're a parrot if they can't explain it. And there's a lot of PhDs who are parrots, and a lot of people who are waitresses and bartenders that are parrots too. Don't be a parrot. Start speaking your truth. And if you don't know something, don't be afraid of ignorance. We're all ignorant. I can tell you, the more you learn, the bigger the void. Because the more you learn, the more ignorant you realize you really are. So it isn't going to get you there. You're not going to be able to fill that one up ever. So don't even try it from this perspective. But you can inform your own ignorance relative to your own path and then follow it more efficiently. That's what we're called to do. Be who we are, not somebody else, and be that really excellent version. And that again gets back to not letting these things control us. When we think about mind control propaganda, I've covered media consolidation, which is another issue, and I mentioned a little bit about that, the idea that when these guys get too powerful, too big, they'll try and buy them out. Now the other thing I saw happen with Chuck Harder. Many might remember him. He was the active radio host back when Ross Perot was running for president, and nobody wanted him from the inside. They fought against him. They attacked his family in all different ways, and him personally, and he didn't have the background to realize, hey, politics isn't business. This doesn't make sense. I mean, it's not about, and he had the great charts, the maps, all of the answers, you know, all laid out. And you might remember him. He's a little short guy, and Texas, and he was Ross Perot, and he had all the great ideas, and he really did. And the guy, Chuck Harder, had 1,000 radio stations hooked into him, and he was pushing hard to get that guy's ideas out. I remember listening to him when I was working in the school district in the 90s. And what they did with Chuck is they got one of the pension and profit sharing trusts to become his financial support, and he was a 501c3. And then they planted an IRS auditor in his office for 3 years until they destroyed him. That was the end of Chuck Harder, the beginning of the end. And the guy struggled his whole life. And I can tell you, he was a hell of a patriot. He did a lot of good things for a lot of people. And I don't think he died a happy man. I know he struggled a lot. But I know this, he did a great work, and there's a lot of us that appreciate it that are still doing a great work because of him and because of people like him. And the guys that shut out voices like this that they're doing again today, they are the adversary. Voices are not a threat. Now it's so easy. All you have to do is change the channel. Really, that's it. So why should anyone turn anyone off when you can all change your channel, as my 6-year-old said years ago about me changing my life and my career? But a radio or a TV, we used to say when we were little kids, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now we think they kill us. Hey, toughen up, Buttercup. The world is a tough place. You know, words aren't going to hurt you. Fear of them will. Running away will. Hiding under a rock will. Not having what it takes to stand up and be a created human being in the earth will. Claim your birthright back. Be the fullness of who you were intended to be. Not a hollowed out human that just goes around buying things and occupying space. We're not that. Not a single one of us is that. And don't let anyone diminish you to that, because then they do win and then we do lose.